What's up, you guys? I'm Nick Sundstrom. As per your request, I'm bringing you my tattoo story. Here's how I got into the industry, how it began to interest me, and how I got to where I am today. As far back as I can remember, like literally back to like kindergarten, I always remember loving to draw. When all the other kids wanted to go and play recess and wanted to play outside, do PE or whatever, I was the kid, kind of the weird one, I suppose, sitting on the sidelines or wanting to stay in art class and draw and learn. And while other kids would try and hurry up and get their stuff finished, I remember sitting back with the teacher and wanting to learn more techniques and grow more and more. I remember even when my buddies were drawing stick figures, I was here putting little clothes on my kids, or putting clothes on my stick figures. You know, I remember just enjoying the process of art. As I grew up, at the age of 7, my parents got divorced, and I remember, that was probably one of the hardest times of my life, but one of the outlets that I had was my art, was my drawing. In middle school, that made me kind of the outcast, I suppose, so I began getting bullied, and so then move on to high school, I ended up getting into a different crowd of kids. I finally started to fit in, started experimenting with drugs and alcohol and women, all that kind of stuff. So I began drawing tattoo designs for my friends in high school. I would, they'd give me an idea, bring it home, I'd draw it, initially for free, and then at some point I was even charging for my work in high school, and everyone would tell me like, hey man, you should be a tattoo artist. But everything that I always saw was very basic. It wasn't something that I could see myself doing as a career the remainder of my life. It was very simple designs, and now I always thought that was just the nature of the skin. I didn't necessarily think it was more or less like different quality artists. I knew that my friends were going to professional tattoo parlors, so I was like, if that's as good as it gets, like I don't know if I'd really enjoy tattooing because I wouldn't have that ability to express myself on the skin. But I remember vividly, there was a day, I was probably around like 16 or 17, where I went into a Barnes & Noble. I picked up a tattoo magazine. I was flipping through it, and there was some famous artists' work in there, and I was looking at these full sleeves, these massive, just very immaculate tattoos, and I was blown away at the detail incorporated in them and just how realistic they looked on the skin. It was the first time that I saw actual fine art on the skin. But shortly after that, and honestly during this whole period of my life, from the age of 13 to almost 19, I guess, I really started experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and very quickly progressed from marijuana to pills to getting addicted to opiates. And by the time I was around 17, I was using heroin. So I became homeless. My mom kicked me out. I was stealing from her. I was stealing from my little brother. I was just doing, terrible things. So at that point, I ended up actually getting arrested. I was sent away to a program for about 6.5 months. So after I got out of that program, I tried my hardest. I tried my hardest to stay sober, to do the right thing, to not go back to that lifestyle that I once was living. But inevitably, I ended up relapsing, going back out, and getting high again. And it was crazy because it was like I picked up right where I left off. I immediately returned to it, and that following year was probably the hardest of my life. I ended up getting to a point where I had nothing. I had nothing but me and my syringe, and that's pretty much it. And I remember sitting on a curb and picking up a payphone and calling my mom, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And she responded, she's like, I've been waiting for this phone call for years. So immediately she picked up the phone, she sent me down to Fort Lauderdale, and that's where I went to rehab, I guess for the second time. While I was there, I realized that the only way to experience true freedom from that wasn't through some kind of outlet like my drawing or anything like that, but it was through Christ. Once I surrendered my life to Him, I experienced this true freedom. And then it was after that when I left the treatment center, I Started living in a halfway house with a bunch of other guys, and I had this new passion or drive. I'm free from this addiction that was kind of enslaving me before, and then I was reminded of that day that I was flipping through that magazine, and what I saw of the tattoo industry there. I pick up my longboard and I throw it down, and I skate from shop to shop. I'm down in Fort Lauderdale and drenched in sweat. I mean, it's Florida, it's 100-something degrees outside. I had this big portfolio on my shoulder here. We're talking like a 4-foot wide, 3-foot tall portfolio, and I'm skating around on my longboard, looking for a job, looking to be apprenticed or taught how to tattoo. You willing to take me in? And every one of them would look at my work, they'd flip through, and they would say, wow, you're good. But every one of them would say, this industry's too flooded for you. They're like, do something else, you're talented. But I didn't take that as an answer. I kept skating, I kept knocking on doors, I kept going. And eventually I found a shop down in Fort Lauderdale that said yes. They said they would apprentice me, of course at a cost. I was just happy I finally had my foot in the door. And it was then that I began learning and practicing and seeing how to hold a machine, how to work a machine, what different types of needles there were, how to do these different techniques. First I tattooed an orange, then I tattooed my own thigh, and then I was tattooing my buddies for free. That apprenticeship lasted a couple months. And then once I was done with it, it was actually recommended to me, like, hey, you should go work at this shop down on the beach. So I started working at that shop, and I was doing the walk-ins every day, and the more and more I sat in there, and there was a lot of drinking and drugs, and the clientele that I was seeing, and I was being offered cocaine as tips, and but while everyone else at the studio was kind of doing their own thing in the back, I would go and put myself in the front window, and I would draw. I would just draw. And so then people walking by the shop would see my drawings and hopefully stop in and get a tattoo. There was this one day this guy stopped in and saw the work that I was working on in the mirror, and this guy was covered head to toe in tattoos. And he's here talking to me like he's never been tattooed before, like he's this new client or something. And I knew there was something up with him, but anyways, we talked for 30, 45 minutes, and he just saw my drive. He saw that I was drawing there and everything, and he took my card. And then a week later, I'm still working at the shop, really questioning if this career was the right choice. And I got a phone call from him, and he's like, hey man, I met you a week ago, and I took your card. I just want to let you know I own a studio down on South Beach. Now, mind you, South Beach was a 45-minute drive from the shop that I was at. So he's like, I own a shop down on South Beach, Miami, and I want you to come work for me. So I went there, I tattooed there for a few months, and my artwork grew incredibly in that time. The artists there were very passionate about what they were doing. It was just a great environment. And then after being at that shop for about 9 months or so, there was another shop down the street called Miami Tattoo Company, and they contacted me, and they said they saw my work and they would like for me to work for them there. Continually sought growth through these other artists that I viewed on Instagram and Facebook and all these social media sites. Either reach out, or they would come in and guest spot, or I'd go to tattoo conventions and ask questions, and I just always sought to grow and grow and grow. That's when I met my wife, and we began dating, and we ended up getting engaged and married actually fairly quickly. So as we were looking for a place to move, we went online and found this place, Kingdom Studio, here in Sarasota. And I went and I met the owner, and we just hit it off immediately. So I hopped on board, became part of the team. That was about 2 years ago now. And since coming here to Sarasota, I've experienced probably the biggest growth that I ever have in my following and my career. So here we are. When I first moved up here, Kingdom Studio was a little private spot. Now we have a full-blown studio. So very excited about that. My wife and I just had a baby 2 months ago, so that's been, one of the biggest driving forces in my life now. So this has been kind of a brief overview of my story, I would love to go into more detail about everything that I've kind of been through and coming up to here. If you want to hear more of certain aspects of my story, please comment below and let me know, and I'd be happy to give you more details. If I gave you it all, it would end up being like an hour-long video, so you guys won't watch that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel. And again, comment below and let me know additional content that you'd love to see me produce. And I'll get to it one by one. Thanks, guys.